Hi, everyone, and welcome. I know we are getting into the room and settled, but wanted to just introduce the series. My name is Jen Elder. I'm the director of the Homeless and Housing Resource Center, and we are excited to welcome you to the first part of a four-part learning community series. This is specifically for the HUD Rural and Unsheltered Grantees, but that said, this applies to all communities nationwide. So just really encourage you, maybe you're catching the recording of this afterwards, to take the principles of what you're learning here and applying them to your work in your community. So next slide. We'll start with just a quick disclaimer. This work is being funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, but the views and opinions expressed today and throughout this series don't necessarily reflect those of SAMHSA or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Next slide. So for today's session and for the whole series, we are so excited to be joined by American Sign Language interpretation. We also have live captioning set up. So if you have any accommodation or accessibility needs that we're not meeting, please reach out to us either during the session or after the session at our email address. Next slide. So with that, I am excited to introduce the panel of presenters for session one, and to thank Rachel Post and Teresa Young from the Technical Assistance Collaborative, who have done just a ton of work gathering experts for this series, are going to guide you through this four-session learning community. So just our huge thanks and appreciation to that team. So that I will pass it over to Rachel to get us started today.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen, and welcome everyone. We're really happy to be here with you all. And I'm also super excited to get to work with this group of really exemplary practitioners in the homeless service space. And so today you'll be hearing from Masita Dorley, Teresa Young, and myself from the Technical Assistance Collaborative, as well as our guest expert, Tyshawn Perryman. And later, Teresa will do a really beautiful introduction of Ty as we move forward into that section of our agenda. So here's a quick overview of our agenda for today. I'm not going to read this out loud because you all are with us and you can take a look at this, but this is just kind of gives you a layout of what you can expect over the next hour and a half. Okay. And we really wanted to start this four-part session, which is really working to help you all think about how you are partnering with other systems that may be serving people who are unhoused, people who are recently housed, having exited homelessness, and really sort of orient you to this concept of whole person care. And I imagine most of you are very familiar with this concept of whole person care. But really, it consists of addressing all of the different needs that an individual has as we assist them to exit homelessness, to secure housing, to address their emotional needs, their social needs, their financial, spiritual, behavioral health, and physical needs, right? And oftentimes as homeless service providers or continuum of care grantees, we may only do a piece of that. And so it's really important, and what you'll learn more about over the course of this 4-week session is who are the other partners that can be brought to the table to make sure that we are comprehensively addressing the needs of the folks who we are serving so we can optimize their potential to have, to achieve recovery, to achieve a life that is not rooted in the identity of homelessness. Okay, now I get to turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Teresa, to talk about centering your core values.
Hi, thanks, Rachel. So when we're talking about what Rachel mentioned, which is assessing for and implementing programs or partnerships to meet the whole person needs of people in your community, we need to center certain core values to guide that process and every level of decision making around that process. So that might look like who you're choosing to partner with. It might look like how the process is governed. It might look like how you go about your assessment, and we'll get a little bit more into that as we go on. But we want to center these core values to make sure that we're carrying out this work in a way that is impactful, meaning that it actually ends up with us meeting the needs of the people that we serve as stated by them. That's ethical and doesn't build on past harms of the system, and that creates results that are meaningful. So we have in a few slides from our perspective what some of those core values that are really critical to be centered in this work, what those are. But before we get into that, since I know we have probably a wealth of experience in this audience, we can go to the next slide. And we want to hear from you in a poll question about what are the foundational core values that you bring to this work already. So I believe my colleague is going to launch the poll, and we'll give you just a minute to provide us some answers. Hopefully people are adding their answers, and in just a moment, we will display those on the screen.
Yep, Teresa, we've got 6 folks who've been, 7 now.
Okay, we'll give it just a little bit more time. I know this is kind of a big question, so people probably took a moment to think about it.
So are you all, Jen, I'm not sure if I may have hit sharing along with you and
Yeah, I am not able to see the answers. I apologize on this poll. Let me try. Okay, I couldn't do that. So if others want to put it into chat, I apologize for that poll error, but I just want to write it into the chat. Everybody will just see it there. Sorry.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can pivot. We're flexible, if anything. So if folks want to put their answer in the chat, that would be appreciated, since I guess we can't see your answers in the poll. I would be really curious to know kind of compassion, fairness, respect. Thank you, Faith. Those are great answers. And Brandy, similar answers: compassion, empathy, fairness, respect. I see a lot of themes here. Care, non-judgment, understanding, housing first. We're going to talk about that. Equity, person-centered, person-driven, strengths-based, absolutely. Thank you so much for those. We can go to the next slide, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Masita, who's going to talk about, from our perspective, what some of these core values are and why they have to be foundational to the work that we do. So I will turn it over to her. Thank you so much again for your answers and for being flexible.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you everybody for putting your personal core values in the chat. Please feel free to keep doing so. Thank you for sharing. So what are foundational core values? State and local systems must embrace foundational core values to be able to end homelessness and promote recovery, health, and wellness. So what are some of these values? With what you all have entered in the chat, we kind of pulled a few that we just want to talk about today. Compassion and empathy. Organizations should strive to create a safe space where individuals can express their concerns and fears, helping them feel heard and valued and receive non-judgmental support. And I know that there were some that put compassion in the chat. That's a key core value that should be a foundation for any type of service delivery, because more than anything, within a program, you want to be able to have a safe space where individuals can be able to express themselves, freely answer the questions that'll only impact the effectiveness of the program and the service delivery. Another core value is that housing is a human right. Really, this is self-explanatory, something that we've all heard, that food, shelter, and clothing are basic necessities that should be available to all, regardless of race, gender, orientation, or any kind of special population, right? We can even go further to state that safe and affordable housing is a human right, especially within this day and age and the climate of high cost, that should be available to all. Another core foundational value is that everyone is capable of recovery, health, and wellness with the right support. So just because someone shows in the system that, let's say they've attempted 10 times for recovery and housing stabilization, really doesn't mean that on the 11th attempt, they may not succeed in their pathway to self-sufficiency and wellness and recovery. So we never want to be able to have any type of preconceived notions on someone's path to wellness. The recognition and acknowledgement, we must also have that the recognition and acknowledgement that inequities and institutional racism, ableism, meaning the discrimination of those with a disability in favor of able-bodied people, and classism can contribute to homelessness. Basically, once there's an acknowledgement of the problem, there can be movement towards sustainable and equitable solution. Another value is nothing about us without us, meaning that solutions require substantive and compensated inclusion of living experts, which we will definitely get in more detail in the upcoming slides. Another foundational element, self-determination, must be preserved, meaning that a community member that enters into a program does not signal their right that they should lose their independence. It's important to foster and nurture that their self-determination for them to go through this journey of recovery and wellness at their own pace. It's also important as a value to ensure within your organization and or community that there's a redistribution of power and to ensure that you're checking your privilege, meaning that when doing this work, sometimes we can easily fall into making decisions or designing programs based on our experiences and knowledge, which for some can be that of privilege and power. So it's really important as we go about this work for organizations and communities alike to conduct routine assessment annually to ensure that there's a shared distribution of power and decision making that is inclusive for all. Next slide. Teresa.
Thank you, Masita. And thank you for kind of outlining what the core values that are foundational to this work, the assessment process, and the program change process are. And so I know we touched on this a little bit already, but we have to ensure that we've aligned with the core values that Masita referred to so that we're effectively implementing evidence-based practices and solutions serving people who use drugs and who have co-occurring behavioral health needs. And just to elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that, I can give an example. So one thing that I think of often when we talk about this is an evidence-based practice that many of us use across systems, whether you're an outreach provider, shelter provider, a provider of housing, transitional or permanent supported housing. We use motivational interviewing a lot, right? So, and we know motivational interviewing comes with like a whole host of acronyms and techniques and interventions. And so we can practice those acronyms, techniques, and interventions. But if we don't also do the continuous work of making sure that we assess whether or not we're bringing the core values Masita discussed, like autonomy, like nothing about us without us, like really the belief that that person is the driver of their own change process and the guardian of their own kind of their life and what's meaningful to them in this world, then those techniques and acronyms don't actually mean anything, right? Because they're centered on a foundation of those core values and those beliefs. And so what we end up practicing sometimes can be coercive because we might lose sight on whether or not we're pushing our agenda and not really, like I said, letting that person being the steward of their own life. And while that applies to motivational interviewing, that also applies to how we approach systems, right? So if we're not doing our systems assessment, if we're not doing that in a way that centers those core values, if we're not building partnerships based on those core values and aligning with other partners in the community that have those core values, if we're not implementing change based on those core values, then we're kind of doing it all for naught. We're going to end up with solutions that don't truly meet community need. And in the worst case scenario, and why I pulled it out in a bullet on this slide, in the worst case scenario, if we don't let our core values guide that process, we can limit the efficacy of our services, but also potentially cause harm, because we may be participating in a process, and we'll get to this a little bit more in depth a little later into the presentation, but we might be participating in a process that has been carried out in a way that was actually harmful to people in the past, whether it ignored their needs, it silenced their voice, it didn't allow them to be kind of the main character in their story, if you will, or the person who's guiding their journey. And that's very connected, I think, to all of the isms that Masita shared. And it can really have a negative impact on the communities we serve. So again, just the importance of making sure our values are at the core. And we can go to the next slide. And easily this ties into stigma, right? So sometimes in the provider community, but not just in the provider community, in partners in our community, we can have some unchecked stigma. And, I don't say that to blame or shame. I say that because it's so deeply rooted in the messaging we get in this country about homelessness, about substance use, about co-occurring mental health needs. And if we don't do the internal work and the external work to both challenge that within ourselves, but also within our agencies and within our communities, we can end up with some really serious negative health outcomes. And so like a lack of prioritization for funding for something that's culturally responsive, like a culturally responsive substance use system of care, or something that doesn't address all of the needs of a person, so including those that address co-occurring mental health needs. It actually deters people from seeking services if we're coming from a frame of stigmatized belief. People vote with their feet, people feel that, people understand that, and so they will be ashamed to come forward and talk about a challenge that they're having. And that goes back to, again, limiting that efficacy, as we discussed on the last slide. And just for kind of just some facts that support that. So several studies, actually many studies have been done about this topic, but some really impactful things for me that pulled out of the research were less than 10% of people who have substance use disorder receive treatment due to stigma, due to that fear and shame of coming forward. And another study, and this was in more recent history, showed that in a period of a year, people that passed away from an overdose, only 51% had accessed treatment in that year prior. So that means 49% of people had no touch points with the treatment system. And that was largely attributed to stigma in how our treatment system currently operates. So I don't feel like we can talk about foundational core values without talking about stigma. And so I wanted to touch on that, and we can go to the next slide, where I will pass it back off to Rachel. So now we've talked about kind of like the core values we need to center in order to do this process in an ethical and meaningful way. Rachel's going to get a little bit more into the data sources we can use to support our community needs assessments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa and Masita, for all of that kind of backdrop orientation. And it just occurred to me, we didn't really share with you all anything about ourselves. And I think the one thing that's important to share with you all is that each of us has done this work on the front lines in communities, in rural areas, in cities, in suburban areas. And so I so appreciate the content that Teresa and Masita have presented upon, because we've actually seen that right in the real world with people. We've seen people who maybe our colleagues never imagined were capable of remaining housed or holding a job. But because we were centering our core values and principles, and because we were using best practices, we did see people recover. We did see people sustain housing, reunite with their children, secure employment. And so we really just want to make sure that you all know we've done this work ourselves, and we also just so appreciate all the work you all are doing in your communities. So we kind of broke out this data piece into a couple of different sections, because we know how important and valuable the qualitative data is, and Masita is going to talk about that, and Ty is going to talk about that, about the inclusion of people with lived expertise in designing systems, in evaluating them. But we're first going to talk about this quantitative data. And I know that so many of you all, and I would love to see in the chat, if you participated in the most recent point in time count, high five to you. Thank you. Please put in the chat if you participated in this point in time count that you all just finished a matter of weeks ago. We want to talk about, these are some sources of data, those numbers data that you all can use to actually help you think about what needs, thank you, Catherine, for participating in that. What different sources of data are available that you can use to think about the different partners that you need at the table based on the population needs, okay? So we know you guys are familiar with the homeless management information system, and are probably many of you are entering information into that system on a regular basis. Maybe you have familiarized yourself with the kinds of data reports that you can get out of Stella. I know that as a HUD TA provider, we've talked with communities about looking at racial and ethnic disparities in the Stella data to look at who is coming into contact with the homeless service system, how many folks are getting housed, how many folks are remaining housed or exiting back to homelessness, and looking at that by race and ethnicity. And I know that you all are very familiar with the point in time count. And you also, thank you for, for your work. I see that you were involved as well as Rebecca in the point in time count. And so then there's the HIC, which, gosh, I always forget the acronym of that, but I know it's to count the number of units of housing or people who were housed on a given night. And if somebody wants to throw in the chat then what HIC stands for, Housing Inventory Account. Thank you, Masita. So to the right side, these two columns, to the middle one and the right-hand one, these are new other sources of data we think could be really helpful for you all to investigate in order to get more information about the needs of the folks that you're serving. Again, when we think about that whole person care, right, we're talking about their health, behavioral health, economic health, connection to community. And I wanted to highlight, in case folks aren't familiar with this, this community health needs assessment. So maybe put in the chat if this is something that you all have participated in your communities. And I'm gonna open this link up. And this is also referred to affectionately by the hospital associations as the CHANA, the CHNA. But you can see here, I've opened the link to this page, and it's actually under the Affordable Care Act. The IRS has directed that charitable hospitals, and so those are all nonprofit hospitals, to conduct a community health needs assessment every 3 years. And the intent is that the hospitals, they're actually obligated under federal tax law to contribute a portion of their earnings in order for being designated as a nonprofit hospital to addressing community needs. And so to conduct the community health needs assessment, the hospital has to go through the following steps. They have to define the community that it serves, right? And we know that hospitals are often situated in the communities where we are serving folks who are exiting homelessness. They are required to assess the health needs of that community. And then in assessing the community health needs, solicit and take into account input received from persons who represent the broad interests of that community. You guys represent the broad interest of those communities. I want to tell you that right now, as well as the people that you're serving, people who are experiencing homelessness, they represent the broad needs of the this population. And that they should also be consulting with those who have special knowledge of or expertise in public health. Again, this audience, you all have special knowledge and expertise about what the people you are serving need in terms of additional resources, access to, as Teresa was talking about, alcohol and drug treatment, behavioral health, housing. And then the hospital has to document in the report that is adopted by the hospital facility by an authorized body of the hospital facility. So they have to document the results of their needs assessment every 3 years. And then they also have to make that widely available. And while this link here doesn't give you a nice, easy place to go to identify your community hospitals, later in this series, in series 2, we will have a clickable link to be able to find the list of hospitals. Hopefully you all know who those hospitals are. And if you search on any of those hospitals, and you know they're a nonprofit, and you search their title with Community Health Needs Assessment, you should be able to locate that report. You should be able to identify when they're next conducting a health needs assessment, and you should be able to participate in identifying the needs of the folks that you're serving who are exiting homelessness, and ideally influence those hospital systems to contribute towards gaps in the service system that you've identified. So next we have, we encourage you all to work with your local hospitals to access information about high utilizers. So people who are using the emergency service department on a higher rate than the general population. One thing we know about people who are experiencing homelessness is that the longer the duration of homelessness, the higher the rate of active substance uses. People may have more untreated mental health symptoms, and also understandably have unmanaged chronic health conditions. And we know that those 3 things can lead to greater use of the emergency department. And if we can work with hospital systems to identify, similar to a by name list, right, of those high utilizers, the hospital system, it's in their best interest to work with our COC to match healthcare and housing for those individuals, and to bring along any community mental health agency services or alcohol and drug treatment services. So these are health-related sources of data, but also that can result in resources. The third item here is public health medical examiner data. So we're looking specifically at information about overdoses. And we do know that folks who are unhoused have just disproportionately higher rates of overdose and that can result in death. And so it's important, again, to be looking at those trends so that we can formulate interventions that reduce those. Over here, we have, we'd like to draw your attention to your single state agency. And that's kind of weird federal language that often means your state alcohol and drug treatment authority. Teresa's going to talk a little bit about this, and I'm going to open this up so that you can see it's really easy to locate the point of contact in your state through this link. So Teresa, if you'd like to talk through this one.
Sure. So what Rachel has pulled up is an easy way to find contact information for your single state agency on substance use. And the data that we're referring to that they collect is called the Treatment Episode Data Sets, or TEDS, if you want to use a abbreviation. And while there's efforts to merge it into one single data set, the way it's collected now is there's treatment episode data set by admission, A, and treatment episode data set by discharge, D. And so in addition to collecting how many admissions or how many discharges, it collects demographic data. And almost always this is compiled by the single state agency and then reported to the federal government. It's rolled up data. It's not person identifying, but it also kind of gives you some information about what substance use looks like in your community. And certainly you probably have that expertise from your interfacing with people. But if you are kind of working in one county, but you cover multiple counties and you just want to know what that picture looks like overall, it captures things like substance used when they're admitted to treatment, age of first use, route of first use, frequency of use, previous admissions, in addition to things like, I think I already said demographic data, but age, sex, race, ethnicity, and employment status. And the reason we encourage you to look at this, and I think all of these data sources, is when we talk about building partnerships, I think it's really important to look at who is treatment accessible for that you're serving and who is treatment not accessible for who you're serving. We certainly know, in addition to kind of the facts we referenced earlier, that Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks find access to treatment at even lower rates than the already low rate in the general population. And so how do you create partnerships, again, to meet those whole person care needs? How do you become the bridge with a treatment provider or your SSA or different providers in your community, hospital systems, public health entities, to bridge that gap and get access to care for your folks? So with that, I will turn it back to Rachel to talk about the UDS data.
Great, thank you, Teresa. And it's so funny because before we had this slide, it said SSA, and we were reminded that not everybody associates SSA with single state agency. Oftentimes it's the Social Security Administration, so that can get confusing sometimes. So we also just wanted to talk about, so all community health clinics capture encounter data called the Uniform Data System, the Health Center Uniform Data System. And so if you all are working with any community health clinics, whether you're in a rural area or an urban area, you can locate, if you don't know who your community health clinic is. I have Oregon highlighted because I used to work in Oregon, but I can click on any of these and it'll give me the name of an FQHC, or federally qualified health clinic, which is a community health clinic, and that would help me know where to contact or who to contact at that agency to get this data. But this source of data, it has so much rich information about the gender, about the racial, ethnic mix of the patient population, about the percentage of the clinic population who has HIV/AIDS or hepatitis C. I know that one thing that was drilled into me when I was working in Portland was that our clinic was serving the highest acuity population in the state. And so what that looked like was we knew that 25% of our 8,000 patients had hepatitis C. 25% of our patients had HIV/AIDS. And then we could also look at substance use by patient population. And so again, this is really rich information that can help a community partnership think about how to better align the healthcare with the housing, with any sort of hospital community benefit funds to develop more comprehensive systems, to bring partners to the table. And so we encourage you all to access your health center uniform data system data that's run every year. And most community health clinics, that is a very easy, if somebody asks, could we see your UDS data? They will typically oblige with that. So we want to just pause here to ask, are there other sources of qualitative data that you all are using with your partners to kind of evaluate what you need in order to build this kind of whole person system of care? The other question, and I'll move to the next slide, is actually we'll launch a poll, is which of these data sources do you currently use to assess the needs among the population, and which of those that you don't currently have access to would be beneficial for your planning? So I know that that poll is up now. And I understand that we've figured out how to share the results, so please do enter answers to these two questions into the poll, and then we should be able to share them this time around. I am seeing so far we've got 3 people who have responded. We would love for all of you all. It's okay to just say, I don't know, because some of you may be newer to your organization and this may be unfamiliar to you. We'll go over this in a little more detail in session 2. And some of you may have been doing this for a really long time. Oh, Rebecca says we use all 3. And Rebecca, when you say the all 3, which 3 are you talking about? If you could put that in the chat. All right, Jen, I think you can end the poll. And let's see, are you able to share the results, or should I be doing that?
So you probably will not be able to see it, Rachel, as a host, but I can give you a little bit of insight into those.
Oh, great.
So it looks like quite a lot of folks say that they use the HMIS data, their PIT count data, their HIC data. It looks like we've got a couple folks who just aren't sure what they use currently. And one person says that they use something called Smart Sheets. So we're primarily relying on HMIS, PIT count, and the HIC count. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that before I move on to the second one.
No, I don't think so. Thanks.
Sure thing. So which of those do you not currently have access to but might be beneficial for your planning? We've got answers like the HIC, the housing inventory count, the high utilizer and emergency services data. The single state agency data really resonated with some folks. Same with that high utilizer and emergency services data. And one person also named the community health needs assessment. And then there's a couple folks who aren't sure as well. So that's what we've got.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you all. It's really good to just get put our fingers on the pulse and get a sense of where you all are, and completely understandable that these would be systems you're just not that familiar with or not quite sure how to go about accessing. And so at the end of today's session and at the end of every session, we'll have a link for you should you decide that it would be beneficial for your organization to have like a one-on-one call with us to kind of think through how you might go about pursuing getting access to some of that information. You'll see at the end of our presentation today a link where you can request, you can submit a question to us, or you can also request a one-on-one session. That's what we're here for. And so really appreciate you all taking time to answer the poll. So with that, I am going to hand this back over to my wonderful colleague, Masita.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you so much for taking the time to just kind of really elevate the why, the quantitative aspect of gathering data and the different methods of how one can really pull numbers from their community to be able to help drive their purpose and service delivery and making sure that it's inclusive. So really appreciate that. So what we're going to do right now is we are going to take a few moments to focus on how we can center data from people with lived expertise in your assessment process. And there's this really great quote by Representative Ayanna Pressley, which states that those closest to the pain should be closest to the power. Basically meaning that a diversity of voices in community and or organizations quest to end homelessness, promote recovery, health, and wellness is really essential, right, to crafting more effective system planning and service delivery. And it should be done with those who have lived expertise and or experience both past and present. And how to figure that out is to really have an effective assessment process that you're able to do on a regular basis. Next slide. Okay, so what does that assessment process look like when you are looking to center data with people with lived expertise, right? How should you go about doing it, starting the process? What should that assessment infrastructure be about so then that it captures what you are seeking to capture to help with your program design and system planning? Well, at first it means that there should be an acknowledgement of past harms, including the reduction, which will help to be able to reduce the criminalization of a person and focus on the systemic process that may impact their experience, right? You know, we know of the different means of service delivery where you can provide trauma-informed care, just different things like that that will be able to help ensure that harm does not impact your program participant, your consumers, your community members that are engaged with your organization. It means also that you are able to ensure that there's just not just a seat at the table, but decision-making power. Meaning that within your organization, when you are looking internally within your organization and or your programs, and you're doing evaluation, you want to kind of move beyond their standard requirement of having just, hey, that one person that has that experience to be kind of the main voice that provides input, but move beyond providing input and help with the actual decision making, right? Help with the actual system design, program design that may impact your service delivery, that may impact your organizational structures. So it's really key when assessing to be able to bring some, when you're opening that opportunity to go beyond just the standard of having a seat at the table or providing a seat at the table, but making sure there's inclusiveness in decision making. It also means establishing ongoing feedback collection, not just one and done. Sometimes within our work, especially with organizations that, may be operating with limited capacity, sometimes we do surveys, we do feedback, and it's a one and done process. But, at times where that can be helpful for long-term sustainability and program improvement, you really want to make sure that it's just not a one and done process, that you set in place within your internal infrastructure a recurring time frame to really do these assessments more than once, maybe twice a year. If you're really staffed, that you have the resources, you can do it 3 times a year at least, or whenever there's a big shift internally, to ensure that your process is your program process is in a way that is still inclusive and equitable. So being able to ensure that feedback collection will establish a continuous feedback loop for communication. That's really a key foundational element when conducting an assessment. And it also fosters transparency and partnership, right? And when you're centering your data from people with lived experience, it also means ensuring that there's compensation for their expertise. In a few slides, we're going to really get into the means of, why that's value and how you can go about that in community. And Tyshawn, our colleague, will even share a community example of how that can be accomplished. You also want to ensure that when you center your data, that it authored privileges or credit if contributing to research, meaning that folks who participate and who are involved, they are not just, again, what we said, just providing input, that they are provided those privileges and they are provided the acknowledgement that they help with the work, they help foster the work, they help design the experiments if they want that acknowledgement. It also means that community members should be seen, again, as research contributors and not just data that information is just pulled from with no establishment of partnership. And it also means that having an accessible platform to give feedback, meaning this goes back to establishing ongoing feedback along with it being continuous. It really needs to be accessible for all to have access. Sometimes as workers, accessibility may not be an inconvenience because of your time, because of your capacity, but really accessibility, why not, seems to be an inconvenience to some. It's an equitable necessity for all, right? And ensuring that your assessment process is really inclusive. And finally, centering data from people with lived expertise in your assessment process can mean also that your community is engaged and it's community driven. It's not driven by one person. The term system means a collective body or a collective movement of work. So you really want to ensure that the community has a full kind of opportunity to be a participant and that they are driving the process, going back to the principle for us, by us. And I will pull in my colleague, Teresa, to ask if she has anything you want to contribute, and that was on this slide to expand on.
Thank you, Masita. No, I think you covered it all really well. Just wanting to lift up the importance of engaging with both types of data sources that we've talked about today. So there's the quantitative data, but I think we always have to be mindful of like who that's interpreted by and that it doesn't really give deep meaning to our work. And so the serious importance of qualitative data that Masita is talking about engaging community to get, and because that really will illustrate us. Like we're going to miss some things if we just look at numbers. We're not going to hear the story, and we need people to tell us their story, and that story should be treated as expertise, and that expertise should lead to decision making, in that the people who are providing their expertise are part of the decision making. So I'll just lift that up, what you said, Masita, and we can go to the next slide, where I'll pass it back to you to dig into several of the bullets that we had highlighted in the slide before.
Great, thank you. And so what we want to ensure here is that when you are collecting qualitative data, as Teresa was saying, it's really, really important. Again, these are key points that we elevated in the previous slide, but there are three main ones that we really want to hone in, and because it's really important and significant in the process. When you're trying to kind of use the qualitative data to really tell the detail of the story, right? Quantitative provides the framing, qualitative fills in the picture. And when you're trying to fill in the picture with people with lived experience, both past and present, you really want to do what was shared on the previous slide, but hone in on these three things. And one of those is acknowledging of past harm. You know, first, you just want to ensure that any persons that you encounter, you know, just acknowledging that the fact that they may have experienced biasness or exclusion as a part of their lived experience caused by a program or policy, you know, whether it's in an organization or a community, something may have happened and you don't want to just gloss over that. So we just want to be able to ensure that that is acknowledged. We know that bias is an inclination of preference that interferes with impartial judgment. And so there are many forms of bias, which can include explicit bias and gender bias. However, one of the more common forms of bias is unconscious bias, which refers to the unintentional or automatic mental associations an individual has for a person, a place, or a thing, right? Those biases, which are really unseen, can unintentionally establish an exclusionary process that creates an inequitable distribution of resources and unequal access to capabilities and rights through service delivery. Meaning that if you don't, you know, if someone comes to you, you know, I used to be I don't want to date my age, but been doing this for over 20 years, and you know, started off as a case manager. And, you know, if someone comes in, would have came in my office, and it would be unfair or disservice to be able to kind of recognize that they're not just coming in my office with their presenting problems to discuss, they're coming into my office with their presenting problems plus additional confounding variables, right? That impacted the reasoning and why it brought them there. And so within our organization, we really just want to ensure that whether through our case management process, whether through our assessment process, whether through our data collection, that we're really insightful and really intentional in ensuring that our frontline staff are trained, our program managers are trained to be conscious of their unconscious bias that may kind of result in them being exclusive in who they talk to, you know, who has access to the direct service as a priority versus not. It's not anything people foresee to happen, but we do want to acknowledge at times that those harms do happen, and it's up to us within the assessment process, within the internal evaluation process, to be able to acknowledge that and provide ways of cross correction. Next slide. Okay. And so when you are, like we said, and Teresa lifted up, when you are collecting qualitative data, I love it. I love qualitative data, and I am a qualitative data advocate. You know, I used to write grants a long time ago when I was working in direct service work. And one of the things, you know, that I'm sure some may experience when you're dealing with funders, the first thing they look at is the numbers. Well, what does your number reflect? But the numbers does not really tell the whole story. You really have to be able to have, on our body, we have both a right hand and a left hand, a right foot and a left foot. It's the same thing. We really need to be able to have quantitative as well as qualitative data to ensure that the whole picture is being told, right? And so that is really important to ensure that when you're doing this process, that you're collecting qualitative data. It's a part of some type of time frame within your assessment process, and you're able to ensure that it's community engaged with multiple and diverse volunteers, is community and driven, to ensure that there's use of multiple methods of data collection for accessibility, meaning that you must value feedback over the format. Don't just be stuck to one methodology because, again, it's convenient. Equity is not convenient. Equity is being accessible. So we want to ensure that there's different means of ways that folks can get feedback. Again, that there's compensation for participants, provision of childcare, transportation, conducting information gathering in the contributors community, which speaks to being inclusive and accessible. It behooves the point I think COVID has taught us that we need to have flexibility within our service delivery structure, right? So then that we're no longer in the space and time where it's, you must just if you don't come to our office, you can't get the support. We have to really be flexible in kind of meeting our community members where they are and being able to expand in our service delivery for accessibility and being inclusive in regards to that, right? Organizations and communities must be sure to implement processes for ongoing data collection and feedback. And you can do it through many ways, but you really need to have that ongoing feedback. Again, as we stated, it's important to establish a continuous feedback loop because it shows your commitment to be transparent, your commitment to be a partner in that regard. And you can have internally, you can have a consumer advisory board that is filled with community members. You can have regular engagement of people receiving your services in larger formats. You can have feedback at different phases of assessments, survey question design, review of findings, and next steps. Technology is so advanced now. There are just so many different ways in how you're able to incorporate even the methodology of how you get those feedbacks. So as long as those feedback are ongoing and that you have opened a gateway, that there's an established means of folks being able to provide input, provide feedback, and you sharing out the results, then I would say that would be a good process and the means of collecting data. It's really important. Collecting qualitative data will keep your organizations knowledgeable that you can then reduce harm reduction because you're operating not from a place of ignorance, but you're going to be operating from a place of where you have information. And that's really a really person-centered way to go. Okay, next slide. And finally, one of the key highlights to ensure to have is the compensation of people with expertise. Many of us here on the call today are able to be on the call today because it's a part of our job description and it's our role, it's our duty. And within our job description, we are getting paid, to be able to do that. We're getting paid to provide based on our previous work experience. We're getting paid to use that knowledge to operate in the role that we were hired for. And it's the same thing. If you're looking to bring individuals to the table, there has to be a means for compensation. It's a way to create an equitable system, right? To ensure that people with lived and living expertise, both past and present, must be seen and value as equal partners who are paid equitably for their work. As mentioned earlier, they can be reviewed as research contributors, partners, advisors, and depending on the depth and the scope of work of the project, they can even be viewed as consultants. And compensating people with lived and living expertise insufficiently or expecting them to just come in and volunteer without compensation is inequitable, and sometimes it can be viewed as disrespectful, and it can create financial barriers to the financial and qualitative barriers to the design of effective policies and practices. And when you are looking to do compensation, there are so many examples of how you're able to kind of scope it out within your community to determine livable wage and use that method to provide compensation. But you can do it with different payments. We're wanting to move away from the general gift cards of, hey, there's a gift cards to McDonald's or to Burger King or something like that, and allowing the individual to provide you with the option of how they choose to be paid. And it's your responsibility to provide different variations of how they can receive compensation, which can be through direct cash, money order, a cash gift card, not a food gift card, but a cash gift card, check, direct deposits. Now this payment apps, it's so popular with the Zelle and the Cash App, the PayPal and Venmo. I'm not all hip to all of those things, but those are means that are readily available in means of ways that you're able to offer compensation that is not one-dimensional, that limits based on, again, that person's personal accessibility of resources within their own environment and what they can have access to. So just wanting to really just stress that. I know that Tyshawn is going to get into the community example of how it can be done, because it can. So with that, I think that is my final slide to be able to pass it over to Teresa. I get passionate about that compensation. It's very important.
Okay. So thank you, Masita, for that. And I think we, for sake of time, are going to skip a slide about operationalization. Sorry, I'm clubbing my words. Operationalizing your findings when you do a community assessment. But just to lift up really quickly that it's critical. You can't ask for people's feedback in a continuous way and then not do something about it. That just furthers past harms. But without getting too far into it, I want to turn it over to Ty, who's the actual expert in this process, and introduce him. I think at this point, he and I worked together like 10 years ago, and he's just done like incredible, varied, important work in his career since then, when we were kind of both working together in the Mass-Cass area of Boston. So Ty is a public health consultant. He's a certified recovery coach and does community liaison work. So he has done research, particularly around how recovery coaches can break down barriers to those treatment access issues that we touched on earlier, especially for when it comes to racial disparities in treatment access for Black and Latinx communities. He is continuing his work to continue to break barriers in healthcare, and he's been doing this for 25 years and is an expert in community engagement, community organizing, and advocacy for diverse and underserved populations. So I am privileged to turn it over to him, and excited to see what he has to impart on the group in terms of wisdom around this process. Thank you so much, Ty.
Hey, thank you, Teresa, and I am so happy to be here. I'd like to thank all wonderful presenters. The information was loaded, and I'm glad that it's being shared in this manner. I'm going to dive right in. I am speaking to you about my work on community engagement through what I call practicing practical humanity. Practical humanity is detaching oneself from one's role, title, or position and viewing yourself as a human being, interacting with another human being with compassion and empathy. Basically, practical humanity is the lost art of being of service. Pretty much asking the question, how can I help you? And really, really meaning it. A lot of times people get caught up in their role, title, or position and forget that their work is to be of service to the community and to serve the community in the best way possible. By the end of this presentation, through my living expertise and experience, I hope to give you, the audience, a panoramic view of why community engagement is extremely important and how community engagement has saved my life and empowered me to help others. Why do I do this work? Understanding my why, purpose, helps me to determine my energy towards creating best outcomes for the people I serve. When it comes to all things substance use recovery, community outreach and engagement, I often say like Cy Sperling in the Old School Hair Club for Men commercials, I'm not only the president, but I'm also a client. As a youth, it was the community that raised and supported me. I grew up in poverty in an urban environment of drug dealers, drug users, and gang violence. These same drug dealers, drug users, and gang members were my family and friends. I am a child of many childhood ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. I experienced a lot of traumas, such as mental and physical abuse, which means that I was destined to become a victim of substance addiction and placed in jails, institutions, or death. It takes a village to raise a child. I ran away from home 2 and 3 times a week at a time. I will always run to an auntie's or uncle's house, and I had a lot of them. I grew up in the Roxbury Inn of Blue Avenue in Boston, Massachusetts, in an era when my mother and father's friends were all my aunties and uncles, and their children were all my cousins. These aunties and uncles helped raise me. They fed me, protected me, and kept me safe. They taught me how to ride bikes, drive cars, and gave me wisdom for everyday life. I also stayed connected to basketball coaches, mentors, and youth community centers throughout Boston, and these things helped me stay safe. I was always in the Roxbury Boys and Girls Club, the Dorchester YMCA, the High Park Municipal Building, playing basketball and staying off the streets. At the age of 13, I got locked up and sentenced to 2.5 years in juvenile detention for a crime I didn't commit. Upon my release, I stayed connected to the community. I worked with my alternative school guidance counselors to take extra SAT courses at a local community center. I also did a summer program at the Strand Theater in Boston called the Urban Shakespeare Program, in which we turned Shakespearean language to urban language and performed plays. I remember playing Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream. This kept me active, focused, and safe. My guidance counselors also connected me with community counselors that would support me in filling out college applications and connect me to community resources to get me scholarships and grants. By the time I got to college, it was easy for me to get involved in the college community. In college, I was student, government association chair of fundraising, campus DJ, campus newspaper writer, a community service organization member, theater actor, and stage crew. I also won a community service award for my work in the community. I also served as a missionary for 2 summers. My community engagement highlight work was working as the special assistant to the chancellor in public relations. I was charged to rock the vote. At the time, this was the national movement for college students and young adults to get out and vote. I assembled a team of 4 volunteers. Gave them community service hours. We knocked on dorm doors, hung out in heavily populated areas like the student union and registered students to vote. The outcome was we marched 1,000 students down Fayetteville Street in Durham, North Carolina to a local high school to vote. Fast forward 20 years, in a life riddled with substance addiction and chronic homelessness, it seemed like those aces had caught up to me. Yes, I am a person in long-term recovery. I started my recovery journey by utilizing my community resources. I got myself a residential case manager, a therapist, a housing case manager, a special mentor, a job employment case manager, and much more. As a result, I was able to obtain housing, get employment, get specialized training, such as becoming a certified addiction recovery coach, as well as go back to school to get a certificate in human services. Next slide, please. I did a lot. I went through a lot to do a lot. Now I am the community leader. I do not only work on a direct care level as a recovery coach, leading, guiding, and mentoring individuals, breaking barriers to getting them into treatment and on their recovery journey. I work at a systems level. I engage, cultivate, build relationships, and create capacity building opportunities for marginalized communities and BIPOC-led community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and tribal serving indigenous-based organizations. These organizations have a tremendous impact within their respective communities, but are traditionally overlooked with funding. Most often, they do not have the capacity and necessary infrastructure to meet the needs of the government or private sector grants. I provide technical assistance and innovative initiatives to support the organizations to meet the needs, as well as advocate in meetings on behalf of the community to create equitable opportunities and outcomes for the community while amplifying community voice. Next slide. My work is aligned with the community engagement spectrum, which is informing, providing balanced and objective information about new programs or services and about the reasons for choosing them, providing updates during implementation, consulting, inviting feedback on alternative analysis and decisions related to new programs or services, letting people know how their feedback has influenced program decisions, involving, working with community members to ensure that their aspirations and concerns are considered at every stage of planning and decision-making, letting people know how their involvement has influenced program decisions, collaborating, enabling community members to participate in every aspect of planning and decision-making for new programs or services, empowering members, so giving community members sole decision-making authority over new programs or services, and allowing professionals to serve only in consultative and supportive roles. Next slide. An example of this in this application is an initiative that we had, Leading with Living Expertise. And one initiative is utilizing people with living expertise with substance addiction. We paid them as a public health consultant, like we would pay a doctor or a lawyer. They inform us on what recovery services look like for the BIPOC community. We also use our subject matter expert consultants as part of a community advisory board. The community advisory board is comprised of people from across Massachusetts with diverse racial and ethnic identities. They help create the grant application process as well as review the grant applications to support in determining which community-based organizations will receive grant funding. Next slide. When community engagement work is done like this, it creates an integrated and collective consciousness within the community. Now, groups that feel ignored can gain greater control over their lives and their community. When people from different areas of the community work together, they often find that they have much in common. Next slide. An example of this is my work with the Nubian Square Coalition Task Force meeting concerning the opioid remediation funds. The Nubian Square Coalition Task Force meeting is a meeting ran by the City of Boston Addiction Services Department. Members meet bi-weekly to discuss outreach and recovery supports for the Nubian Square community. Present are community health centers, the Boston Police Department, local community leaders, recovery coaches, and other forms of outreach workers, as well as various public health and human services organizations. At this meeting, I was able to collaborate with city officials to educate the community on the opioid remediation funding and gather community input on how the opioid remediation funding should be spent. This was one of many community meetings the city held. The outcome of the integrated collective community voice influenced the city of Boston to use $250,000 worth of funding to go towards emergency funding for families directly impacted by the opioid epidemic. Next slide. As mentioned earlier, sometimes connecting to resources can be a daunting task for an organization. The organization is forced to develop creative strategies to help keep its doors open. This is when I go into stealth mode, or what I call incognito mode. I meet the organizations to assess their needs, and I work to collaborate with them and other organizations to create synergy. Next slide. I link a fitness and wellness coach with a behavioral substance addiction clinic and a residential provider together. When a prospective client walks into the behavioral health clinic, they can choose to get medication for addiction treatment, substance use counseling, fitness and wellness support, and housing security. Synergy is made. All independent parties involved benefit by billing the same insurance. You might say this is great, but how can I apply synergy in rural settings when housing is miles apart? One area may have transportation, but not have any community center. Another area may have a community center, but no people. In another area may have administrative resources, but no clients. This is where we get into applying practical engagement strategies and tools. Cultivating community relationships takes time and effort. One must be personable. Go to the coffee shops, diners, and local community events like trade shows, visiting malls, community colleges, etc. Getting out into the community and people where they are at is priority. I recall one time when I was working to connect with leaders, with Native American tribal leaders in Massachusetts. So I went to a tribal indigenous conference. Inside the conference, I was looked at as an outsider. I remember not even being acknowledged when trying to introduce myself to tribal leaders. At one point, I stepped outside to get some air. Fortune would have it that the Native American guest speaker came outside to check on her car. I took advantage of the moment and introduced myself. We talked for 45 minutes. I learned a lot about Native Americans. When I cannot directly connect the organization to resources and support, I build external partnerships and relationships with philanthropic organizations, community sponsors, and other resourceful community supports. I utilize social media outlets like LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and other sites to meet professional people and build positive relationships. Building positive relationships, building relationships and utilizing them as referral sources allows me to never leave an organization with just a conversation. Another supportive strategy is letting organizations know that they may have the option of partnering with larger organizations as a vendor, especially if they don't have the capacity to write for grant funding themselves. Lastly, giving gifts and sponsoring community events always helps. People, groups, and organizations love gifts. Sponsoring conferences and information sessions is a great way to get the community in one place to meet with them. Thank you. This concludes my presentation, and I will now pass it to Rachel.
It's coming off camera here. Oh my goodness, Ty, that was incredible. And I just have so many questions. And I also just want to leave space for our audience to ask questions. I think, maybe as you were talking, I was thinking about the degree to which you build those relationships and the lengths to which you go to be in community and places and spaces where these different partners operate, right? You're not just calling and leaving it up to them to return a phone call. You are going into the community. And I guess one question I have to you is if you had advice for today's audience, how would you advise, what could the first step look like in terms of let's say this is a HUD homeless continuum of care grantee, and they really need the support of, say, a community health clinic. How would you advise them to approach?
Well, the first step would be is to find out who is, if they have a community engagement person at the community health clinic, is go there and meet with them. Often community health clinics, if it's not specific community engagement position, they often have community outreach teams and people that kind of, sit out on a corner and give out healthcare information, what have you. It's just really getting out there, meeting them, building relationships with them, and they'll direct you to the proper people that can build a relationship to accomplish whatever purpose it is that you want to accomplish.
Yeah, thank you so much. It reminds me of my early days when I was learning from really seasoned community-based case managers, this intensive outreach, right? We weren't waiting for the people who we were working with to come to our office. We went into the community and we really did this loving people up, you were talking about the gifts and, appreciating people. It kind of reminds me of that, what you were describing, you are intensively engaging in the community, these critically important partners. And thank you so much for doing that. I think we probably need an army of you. So I will just pause to ask, are there any questions from any of our audience members for Ty? All right, with not hearing any, I'm going to go ahead and transition. Thank you so much, Ty, for your expertise and the work that you're doing. Oh, I do see in the chat. Oh, Adam says, great work, Ty. So, suggestions for next steps. This is part one of a 4-part series, but we did want to offer up kind of some bridge work for you. I'm not going to read through all of this because I know that Alicia put in the chat the link to the slides, and a recording will be also available on the SAMHSA Homeless and Housing Resource Center. But if you are thinking about, oh my gosh, what do I do next to get from where we are now to this vision of this whole person care system, here are some steps that we we wanted to, some suggestions for next steps we wanted to include. With that, we also wanted to tee up that next week at this time, we have a really amazing presentation to help you all think about, like, if you're left with this, like, feeling just kind of shocked and not sure how to proceed forward, we are here to help. We're going to have a session on resource mapping to maximize partnerships and coordination of services. We are here to help you, to hold your hands, to offer our expertise. Hope that you will come to that. There's a lot of great content available. And then I know one of our audience members was asking, hey, tell me again about this requesting TA from this team, from the SAMHSA team. And so if you have any questions about the learning community or other SAMHSA technical assistance for your community, all you need to do is reach out to your HUD TA coach. So we know that each of you all have a SNOFO TA team that's working with you, or simply just submit your question to HHRC. And I want to copy this link, or I don't know if Alicia or someone else could do that and put this link into the chat so that folks can, you know, grab this. Oh, thank you so much, Alicia. She's just populated that. Grab this link, email it to yourself. Think about, talk to your team about whether you have a question, whether you would like to meet with us one-on-one for an hour, and please reach out. I know that we really need to be very specific and ask that when you do fill that out in the subject line where it says section for contact us, make sure you're selecting HUD, SNOFO, grantee, TA question, because I think there are other options for different SAMHSA Homeless Housing Resource Center TA, but if you select that one, then our partners at the Homeless and Housing Resource Center will know to send those questions to myself and Teresa and Masita, and certainly we will loop Tyshawn in if there are questions that we really think that he is, you know, the most suited to answer. And so that, I think I'll pass it back to you, Jen.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our presenters today. Alicia's put up in the chat the link to the certificate and survey. It's here too for a QR code. If you missed that or have any technical difficulties, just reach out to us. We want to provide you with what you need today. So with that, just thanks all, and we look forward to you joining us again next week. Thanks so much. Take care.